A desert holiday, let's pack the drag away.
The emotion here last night was so strong that we, all three of us, felt we should be able to reach out into the warm night air and touch it.
This state is as wide open as Mother Hubbard's proverbial cupboard.
I'm not dancing with you till you dance like you're supposed to.
How's this, boys? Woohoo! What do you call this?
Chicken.
What we see and what we seem are but a dream within a dream.
Ned said it so far, we just about melted our tits off getting here.
I don't mean to be rude, man, but no torture, no thumbscrews. This is Australia. We're not allowed to get into that sort of thing, mate.
And action!
Wait. Better finish your orgasm.
Good morning and welcome to Behind the Screens, where we talk all things film and screens related, all those really fun things that everyone loves. I am Beck and I'm joined by Di. Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, we will be talking Australian film this morning. We've got a few special interviews. Who's on the show today, Beck?
We'll be hearing from some really great projects. Factory 293 is a short film out of Perth. It's about Soviet Russia in World War II.
Wow, and they're making it in Perth.
They made it in Perth, yeah. So it was all mainly vis effects. It's really quite interesting how they did it, and they just sort of soldiered through and decided to make it in the boiling heat of summer in Perth, and they made a film about World War II Soviet Russia. So we'll be talking to the director about that film, and then we'll also be hearing about the Shut Up, Sit Down and Watch Film Festival, which is such a tongue twister, but it's really interesting. It's basically about, it is a film festival, especially for films that were made by people with learning disabilities.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The very first one in the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah.
Well, we've also got a bit of film news happening, a bit of a box office crisis for Australian films. Do we not have that story every week, Rebecca?
I feel like we have it at least once a year. We get into crisis mode over something, but there's been, I guess, a string of disappointing results for Australian films at the box office.
Yeah,
so people
a few
are getting
films
concerned.
that people thought would do really well that have basically tanked. So we'll be having a look at that. Also, Netflix about to go live in Australia, and the Pirates of one high-profile Oscar-winning film in Australia. Anyone who's downloaded it may be targeted by the film studio, so we'll have a chat about that.
Very, very interesting. We'll kick it off with some music this morning. This is Dallas Frasca with You Are Beautiful. Listening to Behind the Screens on Radio Adelaide.
You are beautiful.
How gorgeous is that? That's Daughters from We Were Evergreen from their debut album. And before that we heard Dallas Frasca with You Are Beautiful. You're on Behind the Screens with Beck and Di, where we talk all things Australian film.
We do, and there's a really interesting film festival coming up in Angaston, October 31st. It is the very first Sit Down, Shut Up and Watch film festival. Well, actually, Film and New Media Festival.
Okay.
Mouthful.
So this is one we're talking about, where people with a background of learning disabilities have gone and made their own projects.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting project, the very first of its kind in the Southern Hemisphere. And the chairperson of the committee behind the film festival, Lee Vichuk, spoke to me and sort of explained a bit about what the festival is all about.
The Sit Down, Shut Up and Watch Film and New Media Festival has come out as a result of Tutti bringing some people from a similar festival over from the UK to do film workshops about 3 years ago. And after those workshops, which are designed to specifically for people with learning disability to learn how to create film and story and, make their own films, after the workshops were held out here, there was such a great response to them that there were a core of people, myself included, who wanted to really create a festival of our own in Australia. And we've been meeting about once a month and sometimes more for the last 3 years to create that.
That's fantastic. So there was a committee made to create film, and out of that, a festival has been born.
What happens is the Oscar Bright people that came out, they run a 4-day workshop, which was specifically aimed for people with learning disability. And during that workshop, people learn how to create a storyline and to use a camera and just create their own films, which is usually a very unique perspective on the world.
When people submitted to the festival, was it just people who'd done this workshop that submitted, or were there entries from all over?
It was the criteria had to be that it was significantly learning disabled people that were either making the films or starring in the films, and that they had a great deal of input to the films. They could be from anywhere in the world, and we had some entries from Israel, from Ireland, and the UK and Germany as well. So it was worldwide.
I don't know, it's a topic very close to my heart. My brother has autism, and he's quite young, and sort of he's showing an interest in filmmaking.
Oh, really? Well, he should come to one of our workshops that we'll do in the new year.
Well, now that I know about it, after this show, I'm going to go email my parents about it. So,
absolutely, fantastic. Well, I reckon he'll have a ball. Everybody that gets involved seems to really enjoy it.
Good. I'm glad we have programs like this.
Oh, so am I, mate. So am I.
What was that learning process like? I mean, I'd love to sort of to see that. I mean, workshops in general for filmmaking tend to be quite joyous because people love movies and they love to learn how to make them. What was some of the, I guess, reactions like in these workshops?
Mostly, it seems that people are just overjoyed to finally have a creative outlet. You know, perhaps they might have thought in an area where they could never have that, and all of a sudden they're making their own films and doing it well.
Do you find that it's a group of people who are often unable to express themselves, or they find it harder to express themselves? Do you find that because of that, when they make films, that you get very sort of unique concepts and ideas? Absolutely. Yeah, generally it's a really unusual perception of the world, and I think that's great. Personally, I think the more viewpoints we can have, the better.
Can you tell us about some of the films in the film festival?
We had a lot of animated films entered. Animation is not an easy thing to do. You can start to do an animated film with a pen and a piece of paper, really. So it's very accessible to people. Yeah, so we had a lot of animation. We've grouped our films under headings like films that made us laugh, films about relationships. There's also a category called Our Story, which is basically to do with people talking about how their disabilities impact on them in the greater world. And films about relationships. Fantastic stuff.
Thank you so much, Lee, for giving us a little bit of a glimpse of what we can expect during the festival. And if people want to come along, where's it going to be held?
It's going to be held tomorrow week on the 31st at Anguston Town Hall in the beautiful Barossa Valley town of Anguston.
That was Lee Vichuk, the chairperson of the Sit Down, Shut Up and Watch Film and New Media Committee, which was the committee behind the film festival, which will be on October 31st. That was myself and my co-host Finlay McNeilage having a chat to her about that really exciting new venture.
Yeah, it does sound like an interesting project.
It really does, and you can find out more at sitdownshutupandwatch.com.
You're on Behind the Screens with Rebecca and Di. We're talking film, but we're going to go a bit of a track. This is Who's On First by Pitt the Elder.
I am Kat S. McCarthy, Esquire.
And I'm Tristan Theodore Linton.
And together we are
Real Time.
10 o'clock Wednesdays on Radio Adelaide.
For all your excellent movie needs.
Real Time. If you want to listen to the other movie show on Radio Adelaide, that's the one. We're Behind the Screens on Radio Adelaide, on digital radio, online, and 101.5 FM. And before that, we heard from Pitt the Elder with Who's On First. Next, we're going to be talking to a really interesting project. So this is the writer-director of Factory 293. His name is Roderick McKay. It's an intriguing film. It's a 30-minute short film that was shot in Perth, but about World War II Soviet Russia.
Yeah, it's an unusual choice. I'm interested that it got funded by Screen West. Often you struggle to get anything that's not totally based in, set in, and all about Australia funded by our funding bodies.
Absolutely. And it was funded by Screen West through their 3-to-1 crowdfunding program, which is where every dollar you raise on a crowdfunding platform, they'll match it with 3.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty good.
It's pretty good. And when they did announce it, I think it was last year or the year before, people just went nuts. And they were one of the first people to receive the funding. So basically, Finn McNeilage and myself had a chat to Roderick and asked him about the project.
The film's called Factory 293. We shot last year in June, which, it was a bit frosty for Perth, Western Australia, but despite that, not enough to really generate snow, which was interesting because the film is set in 1940 snow-swept Russia. It's a 26-minute slow-burn thriller drama that focuses on a day in the lives of a ragtag group of women munitions machinists and their despondent factory manager, Grigory. And Grigory is this sort of celebrated war hero that seems to have fallen from grace. He's been chewed up and spat out by Stalin and discarded to this remote munitions factory, and as a result feels as though Stalin has abandoned him. So the film really shows his faith in Stalin and the war in its final stages of sort of ideological collapse, and Grigory decides to commit to a course of action before the factory inspectors arrive that day, but things don't quite go to plan.
Yeah, that sounds like a really sort of specific sort of film. Do you have a really deep history in that sort of topic?
Not really. I've lived in Australia all my life. I've got family in the UK and Scotland and Poland. So I guess international stories have always been of interest. But probably more so, I just love, period dramas and generally any sort of stories that require worlds to really be heavily designed and built from the ground up. I just get my kicks out of that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Well, then, you definitely. This is definitely that film. It's a pretty impressive construction to make a period Russian piece in Perth, WA.
Oh, thank you. A little bit ridiculous. It's bizarre. Reflecting on how possessed you can get by ideas and see them through, even when they are sort of as crazy as this. But I guess the story, on a sort of subtextual level, what it's actually really about is exploring how when people are forced to fall in line for a perceived greater good and function like machines, that malfunctions occur. So in the film, amidst all the sort of static-ridden radio propaganda broadcasts and the disorientating whitewash of this blizzard, this truth emerges and confronts characters. So, the whole blizzard thing and, a great big sweeping munitions factory isn't just there for audacious production design and to show what we can do. It actually does have a place sort of in the story and exploring this theme.
Yeah, and I think it's it all fits. Like, it all kind of came together in a very compelling kind of a way. What I might talk about now is you guys got crowdfunding. And when did that occur?
That was quite a while ago now. It would have been December 2012 was when the campaign was, and that was part of the whole thing was created by Screen West, and their fairly bold funding mechanism, the 3-to-1 crowdfunding program, and whereby, for every dollar that you raise, Screen West would match it with 3. So it really incentivized, people getting on board and committing funds. I think they, the funding mechanism generated something like, $200,000 worth of investment from the private sector, just from people. So it was quite successful on that level. But it was an interesting process. You did feel a little bit like crabs in a bucket, all pitched against one another, trying to hit your target so you could tap into this limited pot of money that Screen West had there. So, it was stressful.
It does seem like a successful program run by Screen West, and you guys must have been one of the first to receive that sort of money. And you're like the writer as well as the director of the project. When you were setting out writing it, you had to have in your mind that you'd need some money to create it. When you were trying to visualize exactly how you're going to bring that vision to screen, what did you have in mind? Did you know you had to sort of reach out into the VisFX world, or did you think you'd just be able to create everything with real life effects?
It was a tricky balancing act between, what could be done physically and what had to be done digitally. Luckily, I'd worked with the same team before on my previous project, Trigger, which I co-directed with a guy called Dave Stevens. So I'd worked with Andrew Gordon on that project, and he was a DOP and a VFX artist on that. And, from that project, it was pretty clear that Andy was just this Herculean talent. I mean, the guy is amazing. He's completely self-taught. He's an engineer by day, working in the resource sector. But, this just self-taught VFX guru by night, I guess you could say. So I knew what his capabilities were, and when I was writing Factory 293, and sorry, not just his capabilities, but everyone else we worked with. So when I was writing Factory 293, I really wanted to push the team further and, throw them in the deep end. So Snow Soaked Russia seemed like a fitting kind of a challenge. But I knew it was going to push them, but I knew it was possible. But it was an experiment for sure.
Well, I mean, it all came together in the end, so you can, with the benefit of hindsight, you can say it was a brilliant idea.
Cool, great to hear.
Some of those breakdowns that were put together about the VFX, seeing the before and after was pretty amazing work, especially just coming from like one guy.
Yeah, I mean, Andy worked on over 200 VFX shots for the film, so I mean, he was on top of his full-time job as an engineer. As a 9 to 5, he was sort of doing this stuff, in his lunch breaks and at night. And it was very DIY, just a sort of prosumer level laptop, on the coffee table in his living room in front of his TV, just rendering out stuff for, hours on end. So, yeah, it was real homebrew, which, is really exciting because it does show that with the skills and the expertise, you can actually, pull this stuff off. I mean, the skills and the expertise are hard to acquire and it takes a long time, but the tools to do it are really quite attainable now. So that was also kind of what the project was about, was kind of pushing the envelope on that front, seeing how far we could take it. Certainly by no means not everything went to plan. We did think that we'd be able to rely on practical snow effects a little bit more than we ended up, and the guy who was in charge of that department was a guy called Jeremy Shaw, and he had a relationship with Snow Business UK in the UK, and they've done all the snow on films like Harry Potter and Batman Begins, and anything basically that's shot at Pinewood Studios or Shepperton Studios that had practical snow.
He's the snow expert.
Lucky enough. Yeah, snow experts. It's everything's an art form, I guess, in its own right, and these guys are just the consummate professionals of sort of snow and winter effects. So we ordered in this practical snow effect stuff from them, from the UK, and that was fun, but it was very messy, and because there was a lot of background replacements and mixed media, when you kind of created these blizzard effects with these fans and this stuff, it obscured the green screens or blue screens, and basically mean you couldn't get a effective key for replacing background. So we tried and it didn't quite work. So we had to rely on particle effects, so digital blizzard effects a little bit more than we first anticipated. But we always tried to go with the practical wherever we could.
It all blends fairly well between the practical and the digital, and I find that visual effects tends to work best when that is the case, when you can get as much on set as you can. Every little bit helps.
Yeah, and like we always had the practical effects stuff as like a really good visual reference for the digital. But I think, Andy, he gave me a little bit of a breakdown of, the sort of software he used and how he did the particle effects. It was primarily After Effects for compositing, then 3ds Max for 3D stuff, including camera stabilization, which we did a lot of, and then it was Fume Effects for smoke sims to model snowfall in the distance, so, in our wide shots kind of in the background. Then for close-up digital snow, it was particles attached to smoke sims for close-up snow, and then Synth-Eyes for camera tracking, so it was a real mixed bag of bits and bobs.
Just you listing those few things, it makes it really obvious to me that you definitely, I think I need like a manager of that kind of thing. Was Andy the person behind that? Because I know in the real world you have a post supervisor, you have people managing all these things, you have timelines to meet by. I think on these smaller projects run by very few people, it can get really overwhelming of how to actually structure it all. There's like so many elements involved. How did you actually organise it all?
Completely, yeah. I mean, I don't know how we did, but we did.
You did it?
Yeah, and I mean, Andy didn't even have sort of experience, working in the kind of scenario you just outlined to draw from to do this. So we just kind of felt our way through a little bit. But I mean, Andy is a exceptionally smart dude. He's a top engineer. So I don't know, maybe his brain's just suited to it. And I'm a bit of a micromanager. I'm a bit of a taskmaster. So
if it all worked, there you go.
Yeah, it just strangely enough just kind of worked. But it is a peculiar one, and I have heard similar responses from people in the biz when I sort of explained that just this one guy did it on his laptop computer. They're fairly kind of bewildered by it. So
it is. I guess unusual to have the response be, it wasn't necessarily how organised we were, how structured we were. He's just a genius. You can't replicate that.
Yep.
Well, that's good.
So we lucked out teaming up with Andy. Yeah.
Basically, it's just a pitch for Andy.
Yeah, that's kind of the way I see it. And to be honest, that was an impetus behind the design of the story. What can I come up with that's one going to really utilise Andy and make me look good, but also really announce him as a serious talent in the emergent sort of Australian screen industry. But the guy's actually in Houston, Texas right now for his engineering work. But we will hopefully drag him back to the country for another project soon enough. We
were talking to writer-director Roderick McKay there about the project Factory 293. We're going to hear a little bit more from Roderick after our next track.
You're on Behind the Screens with Beck and Di. We're talking all things film, but we'll have a little break now. We're going to hear City Lover from Max and the Electric. You are on Radio Adelaide listening to Behind the Screens. It's our program all about Australian film. You're with Beck and Di. And before that, we heard from Max and the Electric with City Lover. They're a Perth band, I think, Beck.
They are. We're going on a bit of a WA theme at the moment. We've been talking to writer-director Roderick McKay from the film Factory 293. Finn McNeilage and myself chatted to Roderick earlier in the week, and we wanted to sort of grill him a bit about the Western Australian film industry.
How do you find the Western Australian screen industry? Because I don't know necessarily a lot of projects coming out of WA in the same way that I suppose there's not a lot of spread for a lot of the projects that come out of South Australia. Is it quite prolific?
It's sort of stop-start, like any kind of cottage industry. Look, it's definitely not as prolific as South Australia and the eastern states, but it's really growing. Green West is doing some pretty good stuff, and I think the fruits of their efforts are sort of starting to pay off, and we're getting some traction over here. And of course, as digital technology just sort of generally transforms the industry and makes being able to make high production value kind of stuff more attainable, and democratizes it and all that sort of stuff. But it's fledgling nonetheless. I think I get the sense, having lived here my entire life, that there is this growing community and camaraderie and competitiveness, healthy competitiveness amongst the sort of local practitioners. So yeah, I think it's pretty promising. But I mean, we have some real shortfalls here as well, in the sense that we don't have studio infrastructure really of any kind. If you want to shoot sort of studio type environments, you've got to try and hunt around for a big shed basically. And post-production is limited and kind of fragmented. So we just need a big project here to kind of coalesce it all and build it and grow it more.
Everyone I've talked to from the East Coast, or, from the East Coast industry, sort of corroborates the impression that I get of their industry of being a little bit more cutthroat and a little bit less. It's a little bit more LA, and it's a little bit, there's a lot of people, I think, and there's a lot more money at stake, and so everything, sort of the stakes are raised, and everyone gets a little bit less friendly about stuff. And from what everyone who's talked about South Australia has a similar response to our industry as to the Western Australian one, where when there's not much on the table, everyone's mates, which I love. I think it's a great place to make films. The further away from Sydney you get, the nicer it gets. And then since WA is the farthest away, you guys are the nicest.
Oh, well, that's a good way to look at it. Well, I guess because, there's only so many first assistant directors in WA, there's only so many, this and that, people that do this, you can't really offend anyone, because you kind of be screwed then. It is a small community. So, yeah, everyone's polite to one another.
Going back a little bit to your crowdfunding campaign, to begin with, I guess you had this idea that you had to create a special effects world. How did you go about convincing people that you could actually pull it off? Because, crowdfunding, you have to really assure people that you can deliver this end result. How did you sort of do that? How did you structure your campaign?
This is, I guess, again, where good old Andy saved our bacon. We were inescapably aware of that, that we really did have to give some sort of proof of concept that we could deliver on these audacious claims. So we went to our main shooting location, which is a pretty remarkable heritage site, the Midland Railway Workshops, which is this massive, big red brick industrial heritage site that was once the beating heart of metropolitan Perth, and it's now just kind of empty, but it's been suspended in time by the government, just mothballed sitting there. So we went there and, had this test video shoot of a guy, with a half-assed Russian kind of soldier outfit on, trekking through snow, which of course wasn't there on the day, but then Andy went and composited all of that in, and that was the centerpiece of our crowdsourcing campaign. And it was quite a long shot. It was just you following this guy trekking through this snow-swept industrial sort of setting, and it seemed to have been quite effective. We raised our money and got across the line. Just only just, but we got there. So yeah, Andy was the key to that, and that was done. That whole shot, if you've seen it, was done in a week. He turned that round, and he'd never done anything like that before. So it was certainly positive reinforcement for me to know that he was our guy.
I saw that Greg McLean, the director of the Wolf Creek movies, also donated. That must have been a pretty exciting get.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I do remember noticing that as I was sort of, forensically watching the progress bar of the campaign. But he threw us $5, which is every bit counted.
Absolutely.
It's not about how much you donate; it's about how many feature films you've directed beforehand.
Yeah, completely. That $5 came with some weight. So. Yeah, no, much appreciated.
Factory 293 is quite a long short film. It's almost half an hour. When you were writing it, did you have an idea about where you could send it? I know a lot of festivals prefer shorter films because it's easier for their program. What was the reasoning behind that length?
That is a good point. It was always intended as a long short, although it did end up being a little bit longer still. Yeah, because the 3-to-1 crowdfunding program, Screen West, had one of the clauses for that initiative was that it had to be a project geared towards online release, not the traditional sort of festival circuit type thing. So that kind of freed us up a bit, certainly to experiment with the length of the narrative. And I guess what fascinated me about that was the internet sort of more and more becomes our primary source of viewing content, and we migrate away from terrestrial TV and I guess the reliance solely on film festivals. A lot of those time constraints are in place because of formatting. 15 minutes is the holy grail, so they can fit the amount of shorts they want into scheduling, and TV shows are this long so they can fit in commercial breaks and the next show and so forth and so on. When you can watch things whenever you want, on whatever platform, that stuff sort of is less important. And they say, whoever they are, that in the future when we're completely migrated online and to non-linear sort of content consumption, you're just going to get movies of varying lengths. You're not going to get TV shows and feature films. You're just going to get movies of varying lengths, and they'll be as long as they need to be for the story to be told properly. So yeah, that's always been a little bit fascinating in how I've kind of thought about this project. We did try and get into a few festivals, and it wasn't particularly successful, and the thing that kept coming back was the length of the thing. And so now it's online where it was always intended to be, and we were lucky enough to get featured on some pretty prominent blogs like No Film School. So that's really given a boost of exposure, and of course radio shows like this. So yeah, it's gradually now kind of finding its home online.
It's interesting what you're saying about sort of online distribution, sort of changing the way we think about formatting. Do you think that online is kind of where you want to head, or is your next project going to be more geared towards traditional festival release?
Yeah, well, it's a tough one. I mean, I guess it really comes down to a sort of project-by-project basis. Who is your movie for, and, you know, what is their, you know, outlet for consuming it? I mean, cinematic release is pretty much either geared to, you know, your big tentpole kind of movies where it's like fishing with dynamite. They have enough money to just market and promote the hell out of it, like literally hundreds of millions of dollars. So you get these big event-driven, you know, cinema spectacles like Guardians of the Galaxy and Avengers and, you know, Interstellar. And then you kind of have, you know, still the remnants of the sort of mid-level drama kind of indie, you know, side of the film industry that's geared towards, you know, baby boomers, which still, you know, they do go to your art house independent cinema chains. But kind of everything else has sort of fallen by the wayside, and there's not really much of a place for it at the cinema these days because, you know, younger demographics are primarily consuming their content. If it isn't Guardians of the Galaxy or you know, those kind of massive, big tentpole films, they're consuming their content online. So, yeah, it depends on who your film's for and where they consume their content, and I guess it's really on a case-by-case basis. I guess that's the way I mean, having never done it before and never been through that process, how I'm kind of trying to think about it. But, yeah, it's no doubt it's a tricky one to navigate.
So, do you have your next project worked out?
It's always a big question.
Yeah. Well, worked out or working out. Yeah, we do, very much so. We're, you know, doing something a little bit closer to home. So it's not snow-swept Russia, but it's still intended to kind of draw on all of the world-building type capacities that we generated through Factory. But feature length and, you know, who knows, hopefully cinematic release. But, you know, when it's a little bit further down the line, we will consider all the more carefully, yeah, what is the right path for this film to get to, you know, the people that it's made for. I mean, you're probably, you know, like me, aware of all of these articles that are coming out about, you know, the Australian screen industry being in a state of crisis right now with, you know, just no one going out to the cinema. And, you know, I guess we've sort of got to hit rock bottom to a degree before we start, you know, reassessing the way we're doing things and experimenting a little bit more.
Roderick McKay there, the writer-director of the short film Factory 293. If you want to actually watch the film, it's all available online. You can just go to factory293.com.
You're on Behind the Screens here on Radio Adelaide with Beck and Di. We're talking all things Australian film, and Roderick made some interesting points there right at the end about, I think, the current crisis in the Australian box office.
Mm-hmm.
There has been...
The yearly crisis.
I think it's weekly myself, but there's been yet another spate of articles out in the press this week. If magazine did a big write-up on the box office crisis. They were talking about new flicks like Son of a Gun and Little Death. So Son of a Gun came out, I think, 2 weeks ago-ish. Mm-hmm. It stars Ewan McGregor, directed by Julius Avery, who's a bit of an advertising wunderkind. It's done so poorly at the box office that people are now saying the Australian film industry finally has to address the problems of distribution and that long-held practice of release windows for cinema, whereby you release something into the cinema and then you're not allowed to show it in any other platform for months afterwards. So Son of a Gun's distributors spent more than $300,000 on publicity. Their whole distribution spend was up around $800,000. The film only took $65,000 in its first 4 days. Like, its opening weekend was really poor. That's across 53 screens. It was expected to do big business and it didn't. The distributor, Troy Lum, says that in order to achieve really broad reach in Australia, that $300,000 on publicity isn't going to cut it. He reckons you need about $1.5 million on promotion. So you've got to be able to do TV, basically, to really get an audience to put bums on seats. That's pretty unrealistic for an Australian film. That would, in fact, be more than the budget of many Australian films.
It would be. I think 1.5 was about what the Sapphires spent.
Yeah.
And I think their strategy was they saved almost, I think, half of their budget or something just for the marketing. Yeah. But that's really not realistic for most Australian films at all.
No, it's not. I mean, another film that's suffering at the moment is Josh Lawson's comedy Little Death. Its whole film run only grossed about $250,000. Its producer, however, is blaming bad reviews in the press. But my take on this, I don't know about you, but Josh Lawson is a TV comic. He appears in sketch comedy, he appears in, chat shows and all of that kind of stuff. I just don't think the public are going to pay $20 to see somebody they can see on TV for free doing more comedy. People have to understand what format they work best in, and he's a small screen actor. He was also in the Working Dog film couple of years back. Do you have any questions for Ben?
Oh, yeah, any questions for Ben?
Yeah, any questions for Ben? And similarly, it did badly, and I think it's the same reason.
They haven't really learnt, yeah.
Yeah, Australian comedy, if you're going to put people in it, they can't just be the same comedians you see on TV all the time. Otherwise, it's a very small chance of success, I would have thought.
I wonder if Little Death would have done better as a TV movie. And I feel like the stigma behind the word TV movie shouldn't really apply as much anymore, because TV is doing amazingly well and people shouldn't be embarrassed over
Well, yeah, and other films are trying some of the other options for distribution. So Angus Sampson, he's another TV comic, has a new comedy called The Mule coming out with Hugo Weaving. They're trialling that US model of direct to digital, so they're immediately releasing it online after just 1 week of event screenings, which will be personally attended by the stars. Then they release it online, and a month later it's available on disc. So it's that compacted windows of release. But I think to be able to do that, you've got to let go of the ego, don't you? It's I grew up watching movie stars waltzing down red carpets, etc.
Absolutely,
so for a filmmaker to go, I'm just going to spend years of my life and every cent I can muster and then make something and just dump it on the internet. They don't want to do it, do they?
No, there's just so much nostalgia and love, I think, for the idea that your film is going to be at the cinema. You'll have a red carpet. You'll be one of the stars. And I don't necessarily think people are vain or anything for wanting that. I think that's part of the mystique of movies. But I just think that world really no longer exists for anything but blockbusters, which we just don't have the budget to create in Australia. So I think it's more about finding out where the audiences are at the moment and just directly going to them, because it's about people watching your movie, not about how you feel how your film should be watched.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's interesting to talk about audience. We had a message from one of our regular listeners on Facebook today, who's from Melbourne, listening to us online. And he sent a message through to our Facebook page saying that he'd gone to see Son of a Gun, the Julius Avery film, and he was the only person in the entire cinema. This is like second week of its release. And it was so empty that the cleaner came in and asked if he was in the right cinema. That's just awful.
How depressing. And it's definitely not about the quality of the films, because I've seen Son of a Gun and The Little Death, and they were both really great movies. Son of a Gun, I mean, I think the producers probably did the right thing and cast someone like Ewan McGregor, who's a proper Hollywood star in it, hoping that would attract people to watch it. And it's a great movie. And I think if it was done on like a $50 or $80 million budget in America, I think it would have done really, really well. So I don't know. It's an interesting conundrum, and I think it's the Screen Forever conference. It's where all the producers come together. That's going to be next month, and I do believe that's probably going to be the hot topic of the conference.
I can pretty much guarantee it will be, I think. Speaking of online distribution, though, Netflix finally about to launch in Australia. We've talked about this before, but it now looks like it'll be March or April 2015 that Netflix will release. That's due. That feedback is coming not from them, but from all the distributors who are signing up deals with them, have dished the gloss. So there's lots of people signing film and TV deals to release their content on Netflix, which is great. The new season of House of Cards will be one of the first shows offered in Australia to attract subscribers next year when it comes out. So it's a case of Netflix taking on Foxtel, because Foxtel own most of the rights to most of the good, high-quality programs that are currently offered on Netflix in the States. Foxtel had the rights to House of Cards for the first two series, but Netflix have withheld the rights to the third series, which is coming up. So it's pretty sure that they'll release it themselves as a bit of a candy to get you to sign up. But nonetheless, Netflix's Australian service, when it comes out, probably won't resemble the US one very much, because for the first year or two, Foxtel will still own all of the rights to most of the good stuff, including things like Orange is the New Black. Has a deal with Foxtel for the life of series. So it doesn't matter how many series they make for Orange is the New Black. It will always air on Foxtel in this country.
I wonder if that will slightly damage the Netflix brand in Australia. I mean, Australians know what Netflix is because, it's a global world. We read newspapers and we go on the internet. But I think people will be subscribing to Netflix assuming they're going to get a carbon copy of the American one. And that's just not the case, because, we've still got regions and we've still got distribution deals put in place where it isn't going to be as simple as that.
I know, it's an interesting problem. I think there's going to be a dual system operating where people in the know will continue to do these backdoor sign-up deals with Netflix in the US, which you can do if you know how. It's not strictly allowed. But then everybody else will kind of be signing up to the Australian one, and getting a lesser platform with content.
I do wonder where the Australian streaming company QuickFlix is going to go once Netflix jumps in.
Well, there's also a fourth player really in there called Streamco, which is a joint venture between Nine Entertainment and Fairfax Media. They're also likely to launch around the same time. So they've obviously got a lot of content through those two arms. But the monthly fees for most of these services seem to be around $10 or less. So they're really cheap.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people will actually kind of ditch their standard Foxtel service, which is what they're terrified of, and spend that $60 or $80 a month signing up to they'll sign up for 3 or 4 streaming services, and it'll be cheaper.
It's going to be a very different landscape next year when Netflix does come to Australia. I think it's going to drastically change everything we do as far as the screen industry goes.
And I really hope it reduces some of that ego problem, because if Kevin Spacey's prepared to sign up for a series that is made by an internet company and only airs on the net, then surely an Australian producer can start seeing that as a prestigious avenue to pursue and not get so hung up on producing things for cinemas that aren't interested, and cinema audiences that aren't interested.
And only one person goes to.
That only one person is in the audience of, anyway.
And talking about online content, Australians are notoriously known for being bad pirates. We like to watch content illegally, apparently. The movie Dallas Buyers Club getting angry about it.
Yeah, well, they won a heap of Oscars and did really well. And now the studio or the producers behind it, they've already filed 66 lawsuits in the States targeting more than 1,000 people who allegedly downloaded the film via BitTorrent. So they're coming into Australia now and they're asking iiNet and other local ISPs to hand over the names of anyone who downloaded the film illegally using that ISP. Interesting.
I just don't know about all that. iiNet are also notorious for standing up for their users, and they said they'll never ever give out any IP addresses, never give out any customer information unless the court orders them to do so, and they'll fight every step of the way.
Yeah, I mean, I back privacy as a first priority in this case. I think it's pretty nasty to be reporting on people's internet habits.
And I'm pretty sure, and I don't actually have the facts in front of me, but I have a feeling Dallas Buyers Club had about a 4-month window where it opened in the US sort of late in the year and then opened in Australia like in February.
Yeah, one of those huge delays, which frustrates viewers. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they work so hard on promoting their movies overseas and, getting lots of awards and fantastic stars involved, and they do all this promotion. But, Australians see that promotion too. We get interested. We just want to watch the movie.
I didn't see it until after the Oscars, so that's pretty late.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I saw it at the cinema, so... Yeah.
If you like what we talk about on Behind the Screens, you can listen back to this show and all the others we've done in our 4-year span on the Radio Adelaide website, which is radio.adelaide.edu.au, and you can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Behind the Screens. And if you love what the station does, you should probably consider subscribing.
Indeed. If you subscribe in October, you go in the draw to win a double pass to the exciting 2015 season of chamber music from Selby and Friends. You get 5 concerts throughout the year with a whole ensemble cast of performers from all around the world. Subscription costs $75 for the regular person or $40 concession. So give us a call anytime, 8313 5000 if you want to subscribe, or you can jump online and find out a bit more.
That's it for us. We're going to leave you with an Adelaide